Next, I wanted to talk about reaction wood. Reaction wood is just a type of wood or wood that's formed under the influence of gravity. So when a tree is leaning, or for instance in a branch, any element of the tree that's not vertical, you'll tend to see the formation of reaction wood. And there's two main types of reaction wood. There's compression wood and tension wood. So there's some research, or a fair amount of research, on reaction wood because, again, reaction wood influences the commercial value of wood. So there are some characteristics of reaction wood that make it less desirable. So for instance, at the cellular level, reaction wood that's formed tends to have larger tracheid lumina, some shorter tracheids, large intercellular spaces, and in angiosperms, the presence of fibers that sort of are gelatinous. They're not very lignified. So all of those cellular traits result in wood traits that are also less desirable. So some of the wood things that are undesirable include the tendency towards shrinking, warping, and brittleness when that reaction wood is dried. They're also weak, so they're not as strong. So reaction wood has undesirable commercial properties. So there are two types of reaction wood: compression wood and tension wood. And they are like they sound. So compression wood is formed on the underside of a lean. So on the underside of a branch or the underside of a leaning stem. Compression wood is formed only in gymnosperms. So compression wood is formed in conifers. That's how I remember it. C for compression wood, C for conifers. So compression wood is formed only in gymnosperms. Tension wood, on the other hand, is formed on the upper side of leans, on the upper side of branches, or on the upper side of leaning stems. Tension wood is formed only in angiosperms. So angiosperms and gymnosperms have different types of reaction wood. Both of them are natural responses to a lean, and basically are a compensatory response to strengthen structural support in a leaning stem or in a branch against gravity. But angiosperms and gymnosperms skin that cat differently by forming either compression wood in gymnosperms or tension wood in angiosperms. So an example in Pacific silver fir, this was a species that I studied for my PhD. In the winter, Pacific silver fir, the zone where it grows in the Cascades in the Pacific Northwest, gets covered by a couple meters of snow. And during that time, the saplings of these Pacific silver fir get bent over by that snow. And when they're uncovered in the spring, they sort of spring back up, but at the base, they form a pistil butt, so sort of a curve at their base. And as a result, so I took a pistil butt, I cut one out of the base of one of these trees, and what you can see is the pith of that tree is way up here at the top. So in the underside of that lean is this sort of region of exaggerated cambial growth. So all of this wood down here is compression wood. So that's on the underside of those leans. So that's an example of compression wood formation. This is an example of a young /pine plantation after a hurricane or a tropical storm. Those trees got bent over, pushed over partially in that storm. And if you were to leave these, the apical meristem would eventually go upward, but you'd have a part of the stem that was always leaning. And all of that part of the stem would form that exaggerated compression wood. So it's likely that the company, this is on commercial timberland, came through and just plowed this all under and started over, because that compression wood is not, this is commercially undesirable. So again, some examples and cross sections of trees taken from leaning trees. So this is an example of compression wood in a conifer that was cut down, and you can see it just looks different, has different wood properties. Whereas here's an angiosperm, this is an ash that was cut. They show how it was leaning, and the upper side of that lean formed tension wood. I had an arborist in a class one time, and we were talking about tension wood and angiosperms, and he said, this explains why when I'm making an undercut in a large limb on a live oak, for instance, which obviously is an angiosperm, when I'm making an undercut on one of those large branches on a live oak, it is much less likely to pinch my chainsaw bar than, for instance, a big branch on a conifer. It's because that tension wood is providing a lot of the mechanical support for that large horizontal branch. And when you make that undercut with the chainsaw, it's less likely to collapse because that tension wood is what's holding the branch up. Great practical example of the action of tension wood in angiosperms. Another example of tension wood at a microscopic scale, you can see in this tension wood in poplar, you sort of see these big intercellular spaces that don't exist in this normal sample, and these gelatinous fibers. They just look weird. They're not lignified. So tension wood is just structurally different than normal wood. Tension wood and reaction wood is normal as well. But for us, it's abnormal because it's not commercially desirable. So the final point I wanted to make, this is just sort of a odds and ends, but I think it's a really neat point, is just that roots have secondary growth as well. Roots grow in diameter. They have vascular cambium, and that's why sometimes you can get roots that are really big around. They have secondary growth. So I just wanted to point that out. We don't have a lot of data on secondary growth in roots, but it certainly happens. But a point that I wanted to make is that cypress knees, those vertical growths around inundated cypress trees coming out of the ground, that's a form of aerial roots. They look like they would be formed by an apical meristem, but they're not. Cypress knees are formed by the exaggerated action of the vascular cambium. So this is a diagram that shows the formation of a cypress knee. There's no apical meristem here. This is the vascular cambium around, right underneath the bark of this root, and exaggerated vast growth of the vascular cambium in that one region produces cypress knees. So just wanted to point out, those are not dormant buds in the roots that form cypress knees. It's the action of the vascular cambium. So that's an important point to make. So I just want to leave you with that and leave you with this cool picture of heartwood from an old Ripley's Believe It or Not.